including preventing births and causing deaths and creating the conditions where over the long run people are going to die off. All of those things occurred in residential schools, yet Canada's never been brought before the UN for these crimes.
And do you think that they ever will be?
Well, there's a move afoot. Like about 10 years ago, we held a tribunal in Vancouver where we did have UN officials who were present. And unfortunately, Canada prevented action on that. But recently, various indigenous groups in the Philippines and in Guatemala have been trying to get countries at the General Assembly to bring forward a motion to have Canada investigated. And there is some development happening there, which is one of the reasons we're actually this month our film on repentance is being shown in a number of places in Europe, including Italy and in Germany, and at the London Native Film Festival on October 21st.
Mm-hmm.
So our hope is that other people in Europe, once they learn this, will help pressure their countries to bring forward that kind of motion and bring pressure to bear on Canada, like boycotting Canadian goods, boycotting the 2010 Olympics in British Columbia, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, the Vancouver, exactly, the upcoming Olympics, there already been quite a holler around that in regards to how even, areas, of course, are being exploited, in regards to environment and so forth. But this is another issue, of course. Do you see that there's any way of reaching out more to the other countries of the world when the Olympics finally going to land over there,
Yes, well, we're planning on doing that. I'm hoping to come to Europe in the spring, maybe in March, and give talks about that and show our film. We actually have the film translated into several languages now, other languages. So this is an important way to kind of you show the world that Canada's never going to hold itself accountable. The Canadian courts are doing their best to make sure this stuff never comes to trial. And one of the only ways we have left is that kind of embarrassing Canada and hurting them economically. That's the way that traditionally, this is how these things first came out because the churches were facing lawsuits.
Yes. There's other things here as well. We talked about they have been using kind of different methodology, if you will, to exterminate people. They have used historically tuberculosis. We know the stories about the blankets handed out and so forth. There's a number of ways of their techniques, so to speak, that they're doing this. Even smallpox, something about that the children were allowed to play with each other, meaning that those who had smallpox could infect the non-infected ones. Isn't that right?
That's the main way. The high death rate was often because of that practice. It was germ warfare. You would take healthy kids, lock them in a dorm with kids who were suffering from tuberculosis, and then never treat them. And you don't die right away from tuberculosis. You have to be kept in those conditions over several months and be given substandard food and lower the immune system so that the TB can finally kill you off. The fact that so many died from that shows that it was intentional because, if the moment they got TB, normally they'd be quarantined. Before penicillin, that's the way you dealt with tuberculosis. You just quarantine the person. We have pictures, and we showed one in the film, of children who are healthy sitting alongside kids whose heads are wrapped because they have tuberculosis sores, open tubercular sores. They're sitting there, none of them are quarantined. So why do they have that practice towards natives, but everybody else in Canada who got TB were quarantined? That's an example historically of how they did it. But when you asked earlier, I didn't completely answer that about how it's continuing today. In Canada, if you're a native person, there's a war of terror against you. Regularly police beat native people to death in prison. They die of exposure on the streets. Like I say, they're forced off their own land. And there's a whole, program of kind of letting them silently die off. And that's really part of the same agenda that's been in place from the beginning.
Now, in regards to, I guess we could call it the payoff or within quotes here, the benefit of what these people would get if they do something like this. My mind is drawn back to, for instance, James Goodbrand, I think his name was. He sterilized women back in the 1950s, and in your film, one of the women were telling a story, her story, Sarah Modesti, that said that Dr. Goodbrand was paid about 300, Canadian dollars for every Indian woman that he sterilized. Do you think that something like this could still be going on? Like, for instance, police are given money under the table if they arrest someone or even shoot someone. I don't know. What do you think, Kevin?
I've given you, I think that goes on, but I have a specific case of that. There's a native woman I can't mention her name over the air yet because she hasn't brought her lawsuit out yet, but she's planning to sue the government and the churches because in 1987 she was told by the government that unless she had an abortion, she's a Native woman living in Vancouver, the social worker said she had to have an abortion and have her tubes tied or she wouldn't be able to see her other children who were in white foster homes. And so she went ahead and did that. So it seemed to be a policy of the social welfare agencies in Vancouver in 1987 to demand that, if Native women would see their kids again or continue to receive social welfare benefits, that they would have to agree to sterilization. So it shows you it isn't in the past. This kind of stuff carries on. And on my website, hiddenfromhistory.org, there's actually a videotape of how a lot of Native women in the United States were sterilized older in the 1970s and 80s, and often through pharmaceutical methods, through
inoculations and things like this.
Inoculations and those methods. Vaccinations. Gotcha.
And there is a few other kind of interesting things here that were mentioned also in the film. Like for instance, it kind of briefly swept by, but I do want to get your comment on it and see if you have any kind of more information on it. A Catholic order called, I think you said the Manfreds or the Manfreds. Montforts, okay, that were in charge of was it a specific school or region, or what was it?
Well, the Montforts, they were a religious order from Germany and Holland originally, and in the 1920s they were in Canada. They set up a school called the Cooper Island Catholic Residential School. That's just on the west coast of Vancouver Island. It's just off the coast here, just a few miles from where I'm speaking, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And the Montforts ran these schools where they brought in German-speaking doctors in the 1930s. And we have eyewitnesses who described these doctors came in, they could only speak German. They seemed very out of place, and they were giving Native kids shots in their chest that was killing them. They were doing some kind of experimentation on them. And then one of the boys ran away. The local police heard the story, and they came in to investigate. And in one night, all of the Montfort brothers disappeared. They were just taken right out of the school, and they were replaced by the Oblates, which was another missionary order.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the fact that I do believe that Canada and Nazi Germany had some kind of relationship in terms of these experimentation programs about how to sterilize so-called inferior races.
Well, you know what? I think that the relationship actually is via the crown, basically, because again, eugenics was something that was started up in very much in Britain and kind of as a fad, back in the 20s or what have you, and this must have carried over, so to speak, to all the Commonwealth countries, I think.
Well, definitely. I mean, the elites in England and Canada and the U.S., they all had a lot of affinity with Adolf Hitler. They believed, like he did, that so-called inferior groups had to be wiped out, and their methods varied, but the aim was really the same. There's even a very good book called War Against the Weak, America's Plan to Create a Master Race, and it's by Edwin Black. He wrote a good book called IBM and the Holocaust.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And he found that the eugenics movement actually originated in the American medical community in the 1880s, and they were the ones who first brought in these sterilization laws against the so-called feeble-minded, people with lower IQs than that. But it really took off in Canada. The sterilization laws were aimed not just at